Our second author on the platform with me is Dr. Daniela Heil. Her chapter and her talk are informed not only by her academic training as an anthropologist, but by her experience as a contemporary radical, defending the quality of life in urban Newcastle as president of the Newcastle Inner Cities Residents Association.
Thank you very much, Nancy and James, for the invitation to speak here today. I would also like to acknowledge my co-author, Jeff Evans, with whom I've actually co-written the book chapter. We're the last edition to this book, I think, because it's a kind of contemporary, ongoing issue as far as Radical Newcastle is concerned. We started NICRA, the Newcastle Inner City Residents Alliance, last year in March, after the Newcastle Herald announced on the front page one day for a period of 16 days that basically high-rise buildings for inner city Newcastle were in planning and had been proposed, which was a very complex idea as far as a kind of inner city heritage is concerned. And if most of you, I assume here in the audience, probably remember the pictures, I was going to show you a few of them simply as to kind of portray the visual effect, how high those buildings are and how they're not necessarily reflective of the heritage buildings in the city. Obviously, there are very diverse opinions, and what kind of made us as a group come together was that really many people and residents felt we have not been consulted in regard to this process. So a majority of us, and it doesn't only mean that we're actually inner city residents, but it also goes well beyond Newcastle to Sydney, and it even includes members who, for instance, have moved overseas but who still have very strong links to this city. What we did, first of all, in terms of after the establishment and various members sharing the same views and opinions coming together, was that we actually used last year's March in March 2014 as a platform to actually indicate, simply because the media were there, to our kind of discontent with how basically the planning and consultation process hadn't taken place. It was kind of quite annoying, if you like, was that always the argument was made, especially from local politicians, that a comprehensive community consultation had taken place. However, that had actually happened in regard to the Newcastle Urban Renewal Strategy, which was a process that had started in 2012 and continued into 2013. And that was a very comprehensive, covering many months at a time, right? So to then have basically a document with multiple attachments that altogether covered 1,100 pages, and to give the public 15 days, really, we were slightly outraged. We thought, okay, what can we do, right? And I think this is probably a very kind of what most humans do. I mean, you can be angry, but clearly that doesn't change anything. So what is it actually you can do to make change happen and to try and influence decision makers in this process who appear to be in control of what is going on, right? And this is exactly what happened. So after the kind of initial placards we carried around at rallies, we launched a red balloon at the end of March, which actually indicated the height, those three high-rise buildings, proposed high-rise buildings, basically indicating the 15 to 20 stories, and altogether the highest being 69.5 meters, how high this would be. And it was really interesting because you could really get a sense what the floor space ratio would be and how that would actually impact on the city and the heritage buildings, right? So you kind of have very contrasting pictures that come to the fore. I would like to make the point, though, because we've often been accused of not promoting change and that we're against revitalisation. That is actually not the issue at all. Our point is basically, if you come up with buildings like that don't actually quite match with the rest of the inner city heritage precinct, you clearly need to kind of provide a kind of reciprocal platform of negotiations and consultations with the community to actually get a sense, is this actually what people want or not, right? And obviously also that actually requires kind of comprehensive engagement in terms of, is this actually, have we done thorough research in terms of will these buildings, for instance, will people buy these apartment blocks, etc., right? I mean, it's at the moment, what is a kind of central issue is there is actually a lot of space and empty rooms available, right, that could actually, first of all, taken into consideration, right? And a lot of organic processes have started taking place over the last 5 years, right? And that is actually, I think, and I'm talking on behalf of NICRA more generally, what is required in those processes, because if you simply initiate change, but you're actually not working with local people and people who would actually, for instance, end up living there and working there, it's a bit difficult to impose something without actually gathering feedback and seeing, is this what the community wants and will support. After the, obviously, what this also entails is, as I mentioned before, we spoke with throughout this process, and this sort of happens on a regular basis, depending on what the current issues are. We speak and have spoken with local politicians, we've had conversations with the Minister for Planning in Sydney, and many of our members, depending on who is available at a certain point in time and who isn't, will kind of respond to this and be part of this process. So clearly, we're not against urban renewal in any form or way, because this is sort of often criticised along the lines of, you're representing a political party, or, or you're basically, you're actually against renewal, etc. But it's actually quite confirming that there's clearly insufficient consultation that has taken place, is that when rallies are held, and there often are we have social media, Facebook, etc. included in this process as well, we've actually reached a huge audience participating in this process. And that actually, when we organised the rally a while ago, we had over 1,000 participants walking down the mall, right? So, I mean, that is actually an indication on a Saturday morning that people are clearly not against, or actually clearly not supporting what is actually initiated. We had some very interesting conversations, for instance, with a former member of Newcastle in regard to this, who basically said, what would you like me to do? And the interesting thing is, of course, on the one hand, there was disagreement between those who visited him and what he proposed and how he proposed to go about it, but also that there is a kind of overwhelming emphasis on building for the sake of building instead of actually saying what suits the area best, right? So one of the questions he asked us in response when we said, how about you take those kind of disagreements into consideration as well, was very clearly, this is what progress is all about. Obviously, there are very fine lines what these areas describe, what they mean, and who participates in them in what way. But clearly, what we propose and have kind of reiterated throughout this process is that this kind of ongoing negotiations are a vital part of it. If the majority of the community says, we want these high-rise buildings, nobody will argue against that. That is actually the point with this, right? But this is also, in a sense, what I think representatives who are kind of voted into the positions have to ensure is actually happening throughout this process. Just finally, I want to make this point. We are not radical in the sense of, doing things or activities that are actually not demonstrating respect or anything like that. But it's kind of a form of this, or it's actually an idea, or it's a paradox of the radical, if you like, throughout this process is that micro activities are sometimes or demonstrate radical things to defend and conserve community values and heritage rather than embracing fundamental changes.